Okay. Has any of you checked out the videos I've posted yet? What'd you guys think? I tried to do a little bit more than just me talking into or narrating a PowerPoint. That's how I started out, right? I just narrate my PowerPoints, and I'm slowly trying to increase my game on my lecture videos here. Except for the live streams, I don't want to lug all my equipment around and set that up. So I'm just using a little Logitech 922, which is not too bad. So it looks like I'm live streaming, and for anybody that's interested and ever wants to stay at home during and watch it on a live stream, I tried to angle the camera now where you can see me and there we go, get this computer in here a little bit so you can follow along easier with the slides. I don't really see a way of me getting myself in the camera and moving back and forth between the computer and the screen. And I haven't figured out how to do split screen on YouTube yet. I'm sure it does. I just don't know how yet. Yeah, well, they're busy too, right? I have graduate student friends. They definitely help me out. But I was a graduate student once upon a time too. I try not to harass them too much. So yeah, this is week 1 here. So you can see I posted the PowerPoints both in PowerPoint form and in PDF. So whatever form you want, you've got it. I've got this podcast. This is a one I did late last year, and it's on what we learned from studying exercise and weight loss, and how that like totally changed how I feel about how we do science. And I've got an updated version of how we do science that really follows along with the lecture I'm giving today. I'm getting a little behind, so I'll have it posted tomorrow. I'll go home and finish it off tonight. But I'm trying to all right, I've been snagging other videos off the web so I want to overdub some voices in there. I'm trying to do a little bit more sophisticated podcast, and it's just taking me a long time to do some of this stuff. Anybody ever use Adobe Audition or any Adobe products? Premiere Pro. There's a steep learning curve, right? It's easy to get started, but to start adding more complexity, yeah. And yeah, so yep. Okay. All right. And some of my videos you can see as they get older. So let's get started. I've already got material in there for next week in chapter 2, but let's go ahead and get started. Let me pull this up. Intro to Science and Biology. There it is. I'm really excited. I just joined the modern world. I got internet at home for the first time in 3 years. I live so far out that I don't have any landline, right? And I tried Viasat, and it was utterly useless. So I literally live streamed from my phone, or just hotspotted from my phone, and it was awful. I'd run out of data just updating my computer. So Elon Musk is my savior. He saved me. I now have Starlink. I have upload speeds now of like 200 megabytes per second. It's pretty crazy. Okay. So before we get started, does anybody have any comments or questions?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I thought it was absolutely interesting, mind-blowing, the discussion in the first chapter about the giraffes. And
Oh, yeah.
you mentioned that real quick, but I haven't looked at the book yet. And then when I read it, it was just like, oh, I have questions, I have maybe thoughts. I thought it was fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. And that example of why giraffes have long necks, we just assumed it was to reach up to grab higher food, right? That was always the assumption that we made. And when somebody questioned that assumption, right, they realized that wasn't the case. It was males fighting, right? There's lots of examples of that too. There are these birds in Africa that you find on giraffes called oxpeckers. And for years, these oxpeckers would be seen picking off ectoparasites, flies, ticks, things like that, picking the skin clean. And we thought that was a mutualism, that the animals were benefiting, the large mammals are benefiting from these oxpeckers picking off all these ectoparasites, and the oxpecker got food. Well, it turns out those little boogers are not so nice. They're actually creating open wounds on the rhinos, on the giraffes, on the elephants, on the wildebeest. They're creating little open wounds to attract the flies and the ticks and those things so they can eat them, right? So there's lots of examples of that. Yes?
Why do female giraffes have long necks?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of traits that if one sex has them, the other sex has them too. Males have nipples. We do not have mammary glands, right? So we don't produce milk, but females do. So there are some traits that are just carried over to the next sex as well. Excellent question. And in fact, a lot of traits that males have that females don't, and vice versa. The reason why they do have differences is because of something called sexual selection. And if you ever take 303, the Ecology and Evolution course, you talk about that. And I teach that course in the summer, and I definitely go into sexual selection because it's fun. It's natural selection, but not necessarily to help you fit to the environment, but to help you reproduce. So there's competing things going on there. Yeah.
Do you teach that class in person or online?
In the past 2 summers, I have taught it online. I am definitely hoping to teach it in person this summer, but I've created all this online material. So I will definitely have all that material online again. So going forward, COVID forever changed some of the way I do things. And I love making videos. I love podcasting. I will always have a strong online component to all of my classes. So if you can't make it, it's okay. It's up. I'm giving people more choices these days. Good. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Hey, never hesitate to ask a question that you have, even if it's not totally related to what we're talking about in class. But if it's science related, I'll entertain it at the beginning of class. That's fun. It's really fun for me to interact with you guys. And like I said, if you have this burning question, don't hesitate to ask me. Okay? All right. So last Tuesday, we did the introduction to the class. We talked about, what does it mean to be living? And then I talked about these 3 theories that kind of govern life. You have an idea of what those were. There's 3 really important theories. I went over 2 of them really quickly. Cell theory. Cells are the basic unit of life, right? Life is cellular at its heart. Anything else? Evolution by natural selection and evolution, yeah. I think I mentioned, yes.
Central dogma.
Yeah, the let's not be so dogmatic central dogma, right? And the central dogma was coined in the 1960s. I can't remember if it was Watson or Crick. I think it was probably Watson. They just discovered DNA, they discovered RNA, and they realized that the genetic information that makes you who you are is stored in your genes, in your DNA. And that stores information to make proteins. But it also stores information to regulate the activity of those proteins and regulate the activity of the cells. The genes don't just make proteins, they have regulatory properties as well. And so I think it was Watson, and he said that the flow of information goes from DNA to RNA to proteins, right? That DNA is not involved with making a protein. And making proteins is called protein synthesis. Synth means putting together, right? We're putting together the building blocks, the amino acids to make a protein. I say let's not be so dogmatic because dogma is often unquestioned. It's taken for granted. We just accept it. Have you guys heard of a coronavirus? Bad joke, right? Yeah. Viruses, many viruses don't have DNA. They have RNA. And they insert that RNA into your cells. And what happens is that RNA can do several things. It can immediately start making the proteins and taking over the activities of the cell to make the proteins for the virus and to help assemble that virus. And then some viruses can make DNA from their RNA. So the information flows the opposite way, not DNA, RNA, protein, but in this case, RNA to DNA, back to RNA, back to protein. And this is actually incredibly important. These are called retroviruses, and they have a protein called reverse transcriptase. So the process of making DNA, RNA from DNA, so if we go DNA to RNA, as you learn in genetics, this is called transcription. And there's a thing called RNA polymerase that makes this. Polymerase ACE just means protein. But if we go this way, there's another protein called reverse transcript. Oh, I ran out of room. I'm out of practice, guys. It's been 2 years. Reverse transcriptase, this is a protein, an enzyme that makes DNA from RNA. And you're going, okay, so, you know, some viruses can make DNA from RNA. And if a virus does make DNA from RNA using this reverse transcriptase, this is what the AIDS virus does. One of our treatments is to block reverse transcriptase. It's pretty cool, isn't it? And in fact, you ever heard of a guy named Fauci? He's awesome. This guy is amazing. And unfortunately, he's being demonized in the public's eye. But he was one of the founders and leaders in creating treatments for AIDS by understanding how the AIDS virus is a retrovirus making DNA from RNA and creating these reverse transcriptases, blockers, to help stop the spread, to help make AIDS not so bad. It's one of our treatments. Fauci he's a pretty awesome scientist. Yes?
Why hasn't stuff like that been publicized more? Why is it he's being put on as somebody who knows nothing? And
well, that would be news entertainment outlets that don't know anything about science that are just promoting an agenda.
and that's what they all want, right?
Well, not all of them, but a lot of our news outlets are not really news or news entertainment promoting an agenda and ideology that's not based on reality. I don't want to get started on that. Yeah.
I feel you.
Yeah, I don't want to get stuck on that. In fact, in my other classes, I talk about how you tear down science. And there's 4 pillars of degrading and tearing down science. It's creating logical fallacies, attacking the messenger, in this case, Fauci, cherry picking the data. And there's these tactics, and they've used them over and over and over and over again. But let's not go there. Let's talk about this. So my whole point about let's not be so dogmatic with central dogma is that information doesn't always flow from DNA to RNA to proteins. It can flow from RNA to DNA. Now, once a virus makes DNA, that DNA can be inserted into your cell's genome. And if it's in your gametes, your sperm or your egg, guess what? Does it get passed down from generation to generation? Oh, yeah. And in fact, between 5 and 8% of your genome is of viral origin. What is all that viral genomes doing inside of us? And did I talk about synectin on Tuesday? Okay. Here's why this flow of information from RNA to DNA is important in viruses, is because it can affect evolution. So mammals, we give live birth, don't we? Yeah, it's not a unique trait to mammals. There are fish that give live birth. There are sharks that give live birth. Some rattlesnakes give live birth. There's lizards that, have live birth. It's a little bit different than ours, isn't it? You see, we have a uterus. And on the inside of that uterus is the endometrium. And when you have an egg that gets fertilized, it migrates into the uterus and it embeds itself, or it starts to grow, and creates a placenta that embeds into the endometrium. And there's this important spike protein called synectin that allows the placenta to embed into the endometrium. Now, it's not the same spike protein you've heard about in coronavirus. It's completely different. But that spike protein came from a virus that infected mammals like hundreds of millions of years ago. And because it gave us that spike protein, it set on course the evolution of mammals into our modern form. So these things are very important. So I don't like the word dogmatic, because if we never questioned the flow of information, we wouldn't understand how viruses work, we wouldn't be able to treat viruses, and we would have a very difficult time understanding our own evolution. So let's not be so dogmatic. They need to really change that. If you ever look up the word dogma, you'll see exactly what I mean. Okay. Oh, wrong computer. And then, of course, so we talked about self-theory. Let's not be so dogmatic, central dogma. And then the third theory is, it's important for life, evolution by natural selection, evolutionary theory. Okay. So evolution is a central paradigm of biology. Now, I do like the word paradigm. You guys have heard paradigm before, right? Paradigm provides a framework for us to understand a lot of different ideas, information, and make predictions about where new information might fit in. So it's like this framework that we can use to understand biology at all scales. And that's kind of amazing. And so paradigms, we do question our paradigms. We do test our paradigms. They are built on evidence. Okay. And one of the reasons why evolution is the central paradigm for biology is because it explains the unity and diversity of life and predicts that we have shared traits due to common ancestry. And this has profound implications for all of biology and what we do. And what I mean by the unity and diversity of life is this. We got some cool looking animals up here and plants, right? On the left is just a moss. Those are very primitive plants. The first plants are moss-like. They lacked circular or vascular system and roots and leaves, but they're plants. Anybody have any idea what that thing is in the middle? For those of you online right here, anybody have any idea what that is?
Mollusk.
It is a mollusk. It's a bivalve. Anybody ever eat scallops? Bay scallops? Yeah, and that's a scallop. And you might not be able to see it sitting in the audience, but look closely. There's little blue dots around the tops of the in the bottom. And those little blue dots are its eyes. Pretty cool, isn't it? And then, of course, there's a beetle eating a leaf. The point here is there's a lot of diversity in life. There's millions of different species. And in fact, we're going to talk a little bit about that on iNaturalist. But look at these things. I've got a minnow up there, a fathead minnow. I've got a salamander, a squirrel, and a lizard, a fish, an amphibian, a reptile, and a mammal. They're really different, aren't they? But do you see some similarities? Let's start with the fish and the squirrel. Or we can do all of these. Does it have a backbone right down the dorsal side? Ribs, eyes, jaw, teeth, heart, circulatory system? How about paired appendages? That fish, it's hard to see it. Pectoral fins, pelvic fins, pectoral pelvis, pectoral pelvis, pecs, pelvis. These wonderful appendages are modified fish fins. I'm not kidding, actually. It's been 375 million years of modifications, but these are modified fish fins. Your dog, your cat, those animals up there, except for that fish, one bone, two bones, lots of bones. One bone in your legs, two bones, lots of bones. And why does everybody have that? Common ancestry. So even though we haven't shared a common ancestry with fish, That's actually a ray-finned fish. We actually share it with a lobed-finned fish. Ray-fin and lobed-fin actually split off about 420 million years ago. You ever take GVZ with me or anybody, you'll learn that. But yeah, we share all these characters in common. And that kind of shows you a human arm. What's that? I think that's a cat paw. I think a dog. I think that's a cat, a bird, and that's a whale fin. A whale fin has a humerus. Isn't that awesome? A radius, an ulna, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges, they're all there. In fact, they even outlined the things there. And this is called a homology. And so even though there's lots of diversity, there is unity in that diversity, and evolution explains that. All right, evolution. Fact? Wait, I didn't have or. I have and theory. What do you guys think about that? Yay, nay, maybe, not sure. You like it? I do too.
We're moving on. We're not just stuck in what we're doing.
That's right. So we've got evolution as a fact and a theory. We got more words that we have to define, don't we? Oh. This is a fact. Species change over time. Now, to accept this as a fact, we can define kind of what a fact is. And a fact is anything that we verify through observations and or experiments. Facts, they actually exist. They really do happen. The sun sets in the west, rises in the east. My phone is sitting on this table. You're in this class. You're breathing oxygen. These are all facts because we can verify them. We can also verify that species change over time because we can define evolution broadly as species changing over time. That's a very broad definition. And when you take 303, you'll learn the more specific definition of, I get a load of this one. Evolution is the change in allele frequency in a population from one generation to the next. I know that's a lot of words right there. Don't worry about writing that down. But what that means is there's something specific that I can measure between one generation to the next. And that alleles, that's just, we have genes and you have different versions of those genes. Like you have A blood, B blood, and O blood, right? Those are genes. You have a gene for blood type. The allele is just a variation. So A is an allele, B is an allele, O is an allele, right? So in evolution, we can measure those changes in those frequencies. Is one allele like 50%, then it goes to 80% from generation to generation? That would be an example of evolution. We can measure that. We have measured that in the lab, and we have measured that in nature, and we have done experiments to cause evolution in the lab and in nature. So not only have we done the observational experiments where we just watch what happens, we have also done the manipulated experiments to show that indeed species do change over time. So it qualifies as a fact. Species change over time. Are we good with that? Yeah, okay, cool. So now most of you have probably heard of evolutionary theory or the theory of evolution. Okay, so we got all these words, right? We got paradigms and dogmas, and we learned what a fact is. The theory is different from a fact. They don't have a theory of why of the sun rising, right? Theories are broad, usually powerful explanations explaining how things work. Okay, that's important. Theories explain phenomena. They explain how things work. And our theories are also supported by experiments and observations. So, natural selection When I talk about evolutionary theory or theory of evolution, what I'm actually talking about is why do species change over time? What causes species to change over time? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Yeah, so natural selection is a theory explaining why species change over time. Natural selection explains evolution. So there's some important points here about evolution by natural selection. That Darwin made these, and we see these all the time. And one of these observations is, have you ever noticed that more individuals are born each generation than can survive? Have you guys ever heard that if I took 2 fruit flies on January 1st, by midsummer, we'd be covered 3 feet in fruit flies if every single offspring survived worldwide? Exponential growth, yeah. Well, this is just a mass of tadpoles. Those are from the San Mateo Mountains. Saw those in spring a few years ago. Do you think all of those will survive to adulthood? No, not at all. So there's more individuals that can survive in a population. More individuals are born each generation that can survive. Are all individuals identical? No, they're not. There's always mutation from one generation to the next. And if you reproduce sexually, there's different combinations of alleles from one generation to the next. That's why you look different than your siblings. So there's variation, and that variation is heritable. You can inherit that variation from one generation to the next. So these are crown anoles from El Yunque, and you can see the different colors of them there, just showing that there's variation. And all of these lizards were caught within a mile of each other in Puerto Rico. The next thing about natural selection, survival and reproduction are not random. Not totally random. They can be random on day to day, but overall, it's not so random. So the idea is that if you've got variation in a population, the ones that are best fit to the environment, the ones that are most likely to survive, are more likely to reproduce, pass on those genes to the next generation. So you see what starts to happen. You start to accumulate these favorable traits from one generation to the next. The population evolves through natural selection. Natural selection being the differential survival of species in a population. So you start to accumulate these start to accumulate these favorable traits. And I love this one right here with the ravens. Yum. Green beetles are favorite. So that puts evolutionary pressure, selective pressure on those beetles. If you're a green beetle, you're getting eaten, you're less likely to survive. So those genes for making you green are gone from the environment, gone from your population. And you're left with the orange ones. And over time, the population evolves to be orange. That's a very simple example of evolution. Good? All right. There's a katydid. I think this one's from Honduras. Yeah. What does it look like? Not just a leaf, right? Let's look at that. That's not just a green leaf. It's decayed. It's splotchy, like a decaying leaf. And in fact, when I took a photo of it, I really thought that it was damaged. I seriously did. I thought this thing was damaged. And I looked closely at it. I was like, man, something got a hold of its wing. Wow. And then I saw 3 more, and they all were similar. And I realized, wow, they've even evolved to not look just like a leaf, but a decaying leaf with veins and a splotchy pattern. Isn't that cool? Yeah, if you've ever heard about survival of the strongest, that's not evolution. It's about survival of the fittest. Hide. There are some important points about evolution, and I've already made this. Evolution explains the unity and diversity of life. As species evolve, we get diversity. But because if you go back far enough in time, we share common ancestry, there's unity. What that means is we evolve from ancestral species. So all mammals, well, you know what make a mammal a mammal? You and your dog, right? Or a cat, or a squirrel, or a bunny rabbit, or even a whale. What do we have in common? Hair. I'm hearing a few things. Yeah, hair, endothermic, right? We generate our own body heat. Live birth, exactly, unless you're a monotreme, right? But mammal, what does that stand for? Mammaries. We have extended parental care, and we provide milk to our young. And we have a 4-chambered heart, non-nucleated blood cells, a couple occipital condyles in our, up here. So there's a lot of characteristics, but we share those characteristics with all mammals for the simple fact that we descended from an ancient mammal that lived, I can't never remember the date, like 130 million years ago, I think. And then there are other mammals that are mammal-like going back further to over 200 million years. Mammals actually coexisted with dinosaurs for like 100 million years. Yeah, scurrying about at night. So we have descent with modification. You know, I started watching The Simpsons when I was like 15, like in 1989, you know, like the year I started working out and the year Simpsons came out. I'm still watching The Simpsons. I watched an episode last Sunday.
Don't feel bad. I do the same thing. I go to sleep to them every night.
I don't know about every night for me, but I definitely still watch it. My daughter loves it. She's 4. I guess that's appropriate for a 4-year-old. Lisa's a good role model, right?
Yeah.
Pretty colors.
Yep. Okay, so just to make the point clear here, we descended from ancestral species, and natural selection is the mechanism of evolution. That is why when we talk about evolutionary theory, we're explaining why things evolve. Good? Does that make sense? Are we good with this? Okay. Because we evolved from common ancestry, we can draw relationships of how modern species are related to each other. Of course, there's, let's see. One way we can do that is what's called a phylogenetic tree. What are some of your favorite animals? Throw it out here. We'll see if we can get them related to each other here. What animals do you guys like? No horses or dogs or dolphins? Otter. All right. Otters are cool. You know, in 500 years, they become sentient and form the Atheist Allied Alliance. Well, that's the sea otters anyway, right? A parrot. All right. Okay. Owls are really cool. Anybody else? Give me a couple more. Shark. Let's be specific. What kind? Oh, yeah. They got that crazy head full of sensors so they can detect electrical fields of animals under, you know, it's pretty wild. Yeah, okay, this will work. We got otter, parrot, owl. Anybody else? One more.
Ghostfish.
A ghost fish. You mean like the ones you buy in the pet store that?
I'm more so thinking the ones that have that clear head with the weird eyes.
Oh yeah, that's that deep sea thing. Yeah, they got a. I'll bring a picture of that. There's these fish that have their eyes pointing up. So if they're swimming like this, the eyes point up, and the top of their head is clear. I'm trying to. It's a barrel-eye fish.
Barrel-eye. There we go.
Okay, we can do that. I haven't had to spell on a board in like 2 years, and I've just been on. It's on a tiny spell barrel. E-L. How embarrassing.
It's not.
Okay. So we've got an otter, a parrot, an owl, a hammerhead, and a barrel-eye fish. Okay. These are all vertebrates. Nobody picked any invertebrates like an arthropod or an insect or a crustacean or a mollusk, but that's okay. We can do this. Here's your hammerhead. Here's your barrel eye. And then owls and parrots. And then otter. What I did is I drew a phylogenetic relationship like what I have there. This just goes and shows all the bacteria, all the archaea, and all the eukarya. And if you notice, we're more closely related to archaea, but that's not entirely true. I need to fix this. And the stem here is the last universal common ancestor. So for this, we've got a phylogenetic relationship. This is our common ancestor was a vertebrate. These animals are all vertebrates. So at some point, hammerheads represent the cartilaginous fish, right? The chondrichthyes, they have cartilage. We have cartilage too, ears, nose. And then here, bones evolved. And these are calcified bones caused by something called an osteocyte. CYTE means cell, osteo means like bone. And then, so we have now the bony fish, okay? And then, so this is our barrel eye. So this is a bony fish. And here, we now are tetrapods. Tetra means four, pod means foot, right? This is a pod, kind of. It's a modified pod, modified fin. And then here's our relationship. So what does phylogenetic relationships mean? The parrot and the owl are more closely related to each other than they are to anything else. But we are more closely related to owls and parrots than we are to a barrel-eye fish. And that makes sense, right? Because we haven't shared a common ancestry from these represent ray-finned fish. And our lineage, the tetrapods, actually split off about 420 million years ago. But we are more closely related to a barrel-eye fish, a salmon, a grouper, a minnow, most fish you're familiar with, than we are to a hammerhead shark. And these fish are also more closely related to us than they are to a shark. I know, isn't that weird? And the reason why is because this node right here, this represents a common ancestor, and then this represents a lineage of bony fish. So we share calcified bones made by osteocytes, where these sharks lack that. Good? Yeah.
So what happened with octopus then?
Octopus never had a bones. They're a mollusk, and if you were to do that, you know, there would be some major divisions. We haven't shared an ancestor with them in like 540 million years or more, probably even longer. And they would be in a completely different group. We would be what's called Deuterostomes. Stome means mouth. Deutero, like the book of Deuteronomy, means second. When in development, the mouth forms second in us. The butt forms, the anus forms first, right? And then in the protostomes, that would be like your arthropods and your mollusk and things like that. Proto means first, stome means mouth, and the mouth would form first, and then the anus second. So there are these, in animals, there's these major evolutionary split between the protostomes and the deuterostomes. So that's where an octopus would fit in there with that. And of course, there would be a cephalopod inside mollusk. Yes?
So the common ancestor also applies for like the split with the owl and the parrot.
Yeah, so at some point, you know, this would be the lineage for what we would call, it would actually be the Archasaurs, because tetrapod, you would have amphibians right here, then you have these things called the amniotes. We have internal reproduction, amniotic sac, and then this would be the Archasaur lineage that split off there. Actually reptiles, but Archasaurs are, I'm sorry, I'm getting back into GVZ mode here. I'm getting too much into this. But yeah, they're amniotes like us. They have internal reproduction and an amniotic sac. Allows you to reproduce on land rather than returning to water. Okay, the whole point with all of this is that if we come from common ancestry, then we share traits in common. And the more closely related we are, the more recent our common ancestor, because there's just been less time for divergence. But as you can see, these diverged. The cartilaginous fish and the bony fish diverged, probably 430 million years ago. Good? Okay. Any questions here? If you love this kind of stuff, I often teach general vertebrate zoology, and I teach that also in 303 ecology and evolution too. Yeah.
That's just what I was gonna ask you. How long did it take you to learn to do this? Because you just busted that out. That was awesome.
I've been teaching college. My first time I ever taught college students was in 01.
Oh, wow.
And I've been teaching full time since 09. So for 13 years. Yeah, it just takes, I do diversity. I love natural history and diversity. So I map out how everything's related. This is the simple version. It just takes time. You start big and then just add in details. I'd be hard pressed to draw the phylogeny of like insects.
Right.
I could do that better than I can plants. Okay. So classification of life. There's 3 domains of life. The prokaryotes, which is before the kernel. Prokarya means kernel. The bacteria, archaea. These cells lack a cell nucleus. And there's 2 domains of those, the bacteria and the archaeans. And then there's a eukarya. And this shows that we're more closely related to the archaeans. We're actually a chimera. We're both bacteria and archaean, the eukaryotes are, which are all plants, animals, and fungus. Because a bacteria, which was the ancestor to mitochondria, merged with some methane-eating archaean, and eukaryotes evolved from the merger of these two. So technically, there'd be a bacteria landing over here too, but more fun for another day. Yes.
I was gonna say, wasn't it that one of those eukarya tried to eat the bacteria and realized it was like, oh well, I can.
Yeah, sort of. The archaean didn't try to eat it. There was no phagocytosis. It was almost certainly the bacteria bored its way in and was a parasite living inside the archaean, and we call that an intracellular parasite because it lived inside. And then the evolution of that evolved to be mutually beneficial versus parasitic. And I actually have lots of YouTube videos on why phagocytosis probably never occurred that way. Yep. Okay. So when we draw these evolutionary relationships, these are our hypotheses of how things are related. This has got some pretty big implications for a lot of things. One of those is we can make inferences about the behaviors and lifestyles of extinct animals. I can't go back in time and study dinosaurs very easily, right? I mean, I don't think time travel is possible. The physicists are debating it, but I don't know.
It already technically exists.
Yeah, we won't go into that too much, right? But, an interesting thing here is this is a lineage of reptiles. And snakes and lizards form one branch. And then if you notice, right here, this node right here, for those of you guys watching at home, there's a node right there. That forms what I was calling the Archasaurus. It means ruling lizard. Like your arch enemy, an archetype, ARCH means ruling. And that includes, of course, crocodiles and then these different groups of dinosaurs. And while crocodiles and birds are still living, dinosaurs are, of course, extinct. However, birds sing to their mates, make a nest, and have usually some form of parental care. Most birds have parental care. Almost all of them do. So you see that birds and dinosaurs are related, right? So do dinosaurs have parental care? And the answer is likely. There's little baby gator sitting on the mom, gator on her nest defending it. There's a robin on her nest with her babies. And the answer to that is yeah, dinosaurs clearly made nests, and they almost certainly had parental care. And in fact, in one of the most tragic misnamed animals I can ever think of is this lady here named Oviraptor. It means egg eater. Because when they discovered this fossil, she was like this, bent over on these eggs. And it was assumed that dinosaurs were just lizards, just giant lizards, and she was eating them. It turns out those were her eggs, and she was protecting them, and we called her egg eater. Isn't that tragic?
That is, that goes to show the full mind of the human.
So there's our fossil of our mom on top of her baby eggs, and we've actually discovered lots of dinosaur nests now. And if you wonder how big a dinosaur nest is, it's like the size of this stage. It's enormous. At least the big ones, anyways. One more implication that I don't have up here is, have you ever noticed that we study worms, fruit flies, and mice and yeast to understand genetics and effectivity of medicines and exercise and Alzheimer's disease and all of these things on humans? The reason why we can do that is because we share common ancestry. We can study mice to learn about humans. We've learned most of what we know about, or at one point, a lot of what we knew about genetics for the first 50, 100 years was from fruit flies, because their genes were the same as ours. Common ancestry. Okay. Got 30 minutes here. Okay, let's see if I can finish this. So on Tuesday, I introduced a little bit of, the nature and limitations of science. What did I call it? How we science or something like that? I like that way better than the scientific methods. How does science? I'm going to go over 3 examples today to show you kind of like how science works. And in the book, they talk about the giraffes' necks, and they talk about the ants crawling around and mapping out their area. Cool. They're good studies. They're fun. Rather than me just regurgitate what's in the book, let's learn the same lesson with something that I care a lot about, these 3 things. Good? And each one of these has a slightly different take-home point. And, these are post-its, so you don't have to copy them down. Science, if it's a process of understanding the natural world, science must have curiosity and imagination. Without curiosity, without imagination, there is no science. It just doesn't happen. Nobody goes out, looks around, and starts asking questions. Another take-home point that you'll learn is observations are important. And yes, we can do a lot of science with observations and making observational studies. But there are limitations to observations. There's also benefits. And then the last one is the importance of experiments for doing science is really important. But once again, like observational experiments, there are also limitations to experiments as well. Let's talk about curiosity and imagination. The search for ET. I talked about this on Tuesday, didn't I? We're like in this golden age of exploration. This is the James Webb Space Telescope. They just launched. I mean, this thing is powerful. We'll be able to see the atmospheres, or at least study the atmospheres of exoplanets. Planets not even in our own solar system. Just absolutely game-changing. And this is about curiosity. I mean, probably one of the oldest questions of humanity. Are we alone in the universe? And I sometimes play this video, but you guys can go YouTube it, or I can link it and to learn for you, actually. It's called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field View. Curiosity matters. The Hubble up until the James Webb was launched, was our most powerful space-based telescope. So you can imagine that to get time on the Hubble to do research with it is hard, right? Well, this group of prominent scientists said, let's point our most sophisticated instrument that we have, and let's point it at absolutely nothing and see what we can find. Let's just see. Let's just see what's out there. So I think for 11 days, they pointed Hubble at a space in the night sky. If I took this, I actually have a pin. The tip of the pin, the area of the night sky around the constellation Orion. And for 11 days, they took an image of an area of the universe that was empty. You know what they found? This is the Hubble Ultra Deep Field View. In this image are galaxies. Every dot, smear, and smudge is a galaxy with billions of stars. All in all, they captured 10,000 galaxies. And an area of the night sky is the size of the tip of your pen held at arm's length. And that was supposed to be nothing. Man, I get goosebumps thinking about that. I mean, think about like the vastness of the universe. That was supposed to be empty. But we learned just out of curiosity, right? I mean, the image could have come back as blank as a night sky, but it didn't. We're loaded with it. So science begins with curiosity and imagination. We just have to have these things. But science, if that's the beginning, science is a little bit more than just being curious. I mean, you have to have that for science. But when we start making our observations and asking questions, one thing that makes science really science is we start testing our questions. We start trying to find the answers. We start trying to figure out how things work. And we start that by forming a hypothesis. Now, don't ever use the word educated guess. I don't know who coined that term, where it came from, but I'm not guessing, and I have no idea what it means to be educated in guessing. Lots of people that are educated make guesses about stuff all the time. No, a hypothesis is more than an educated guess. I'm making a prediction based on previous knowledge. I'm predicting an outcome. I'm predicting a relationship. I'm not just guessing. Okay. But when we start to test our hypotheses, a good hypothesis, you should at least potentially be able to test it. Potentially. It might not be ethical. It might not be technologically feasible. It might be too expensive. We might not have the ability to go test it, but you could say there's one way we could test it. You might need to build an enormous space telescope. You might need to build a large atom smasher. You might need a new type of microscope to look at how cells work when they're still alive. But it should be at least testable, potentially. The other one is potentially falsifiable. There's got to be some way to refute that. Like evolution is a very testable, evolutionary theory is very testable. It's very falsifiable. We've just never found the evidence to falsify evolution. A good example would be is looking in the fossil record and seeing the fossil of a bunny rabbit next to a dinosaur. We'd have to read the fossil record all jumbled up with modern animals living next to ones that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. Do we ever find that? No, never, ever, and we won't. Okay. So the way science works in the search for life is people are asking the question, are we alone in the universe? So we start testing our hypothesis. Can we go out and look for this? Well, we can't do an experiment, but we can make observations. And when we form our hypotheses, one thing that's important, we build this on knowledge we already have. So for example, if we're going to look for space aliens, Where would they be? Well, where do we find them in our solar system? Well, not space aliens, but where do we find life in our solar system?
And the only planet that can sustain life.
So far that we know of, yeah.
So far that we know of.
So far that we know of, the Earth. And the Earth has, what, liquid water on its surface, right? We're in the Goldilocks zone. We're not too hot like Venus. Oh my gosh, the surface of Venus is 800 degrees Fahrenheit and it rains sulfuric acid. That's a, man, a bad day. Mars, dead planet, barely has an atmosphere. Your blood would boil off and you'd be frozen. Oh, can you boil off and be frozen? I don't know. You wouldn't live long on the surface of Mars, right? But there's this habitable zone where you could have liquid water on the surface because that's where we find life here, right? So you would start formulating your hypothesis, hey, let's look for planets in the habitable zone. Mars is at the edge of the habitable zone. But then, as we start asking questions, formulating our hypothesis, we can't test it, but we go look. We're making observations. What do we find? New discoveries, right? When we sent our probes out to the outer planets of especially Jupiter and Saturn, what did we find? Well, we find there's Titan. It's got an atmosphere. It's got liquid on its surface. Liquid methane. Still liquid, right? Life needs a liquid. We'll talk about why next week. It actually might even have liquid water under its crust of ice. Wow. Wow.
You could have life underneath that.
Yes, absolutely. This middle one, for those of you at home, this middle one is Europa, a new surface. And then this one on the far right is Enceladus, where we've actually detected liquid water both underneath the ice and being spewed out into space. So now all of a sudden we're like, hey, wait a second. Are these the only places we could find life is in the habitable zone on the surface of a planet, not too far, not too close to a sun? No, we might find it here. So by making observations, we've expanded our knowledge, which is really cool to me. Okay, any questions here? And then why does this matter? Well, I mean, we're curious, right? We want to know if we're alone in the universe. For me, I'm a biological determinist. Let me explain that really quick. At the molecular level, life evolved, we're in the geology department, as an extension of geological processes, probably in a thermal vent, right? And so you take these basic building blocks that we see everywhere in the universe, amino acids, you learn about pyruvate and some other simple molecules. And these molecules, these organic molecules, are abundant throughout the universe. We see them in space. And we could test, hey, if we find life on Mars, Europa, Enceladus, does it use DNA or some form of nucleic acid to store its information? Is it using proteins? Does it make proteins from amino acids? Does it have a cell membrane made up of phospholipids? So life might look very different, but is the chemistry of life similar? Does it converge on these similar things because we're all starting with the same building blocks? We could test that. We could also test about, is life cellular? I'm sure life evolves. Okay. And these are other things that we could ask, like, does it use ATP for energy? Does it have similar metabolic processes? We don't know. Are the conditions that lead to life common or are they rare? But the point of searching for ET and doing science is, you're going to hear me say this again, right? Science begins with curiosity and imagination. We can use observations to test our hypotheses. And then as we go out, we're making observations, we make new discoveries. It turns out we don't really understand what the habitable zone might be. And then, of course, this thing about hypotheses being at least potentially testable and falsifiable. Any questions about that? You got those points down? Yeah. We're not all in a lab conducting experiments all the time, right? How many of you like birding and natural history, like knowing what the names of things are, or where you find them?
like it, but I'm terrible.
Well, you're in luck. There's so many like different bugs. I mean, how many of you have ever seen a dragonfly or a butterfly and go, well, what is that? Okay. How many of you would like to do some science on the side? Just contribute to science. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Observations in science are very important. And it turns out that you can be a part of science very easily. I have these apps on my phone, eBird and iNaturalist. I've actually been uploading like my life's work to iNaturalist over the last few months. I've been doing photography of like life for close to 20 years. So I'm slowly uploading all of these photos, which you can check me out, just Tom Kennedy on iNaturalist. eBird, I'm T Kennedy 11, I think. But at any rate, what these websites or apps do is you collect lots of data. You can go out birding and you can record all the birds that you see and the numbers. And that gives us lots of information. With iNaturalist, almost every one of us has an iPhone. You see a butterfly, hop on iNaturalist, take a picture of it, upload it, and it will help you identify it. And then the community will come in there and help you identify what you just took a picture of. So even if you have no idea, it's okay. But when your phone records that image, it has a location of where you saw that animal or that plant. That is making observations, and that is collecting data. And making observations and collecting data is incredibly important. And sometimes you might not even have your question in mind, and you start like, I'm going to go birding. I'm going to write down all the birds I see, take pictures of all the animals and plants I see. And this allows us with observations just to collect lots and lots of data without having to do a manipulated experiment. I can't really do a manipulated experiment on bird migration or the effects of climate change on how that's going to affect the ranges of animals. We can understand the effects of it, but we can't run the experiment of climate change across a broad geographic region. So we're limited in what we can do with observations. You also might not be able to do an experiment on like smoking, because you can't assign like, you guys aren't going to smoke, you guys are going to smoke and drink about 5 or 6 beers a day and eat pizza every day. You guys, I'm putting you guys all on a vegetable-based keto diet, drinking water. Well, you guys are going to die in a few years, right? You guys are going to live. And oh yeah, don't ever exercise. You guys are going to exercise, get you 10,000 steps in a day. You guys just sit there and watch TV. We're just going to bring pizza, beer, and cigarettes for you the rest of your life. That is an unethical experiment to do because you harm your participants. So we collect data we do observations of people that self-report. And of course, this is showing the range of road runners. Of course, there are limitations with experiments. I mean, there are limitations with observations. With observations, you don't always know what's that. Correlation does not always lead to causation. Sometimes with observational experiments, it's hard to get at causation. One of my favorite examples is global climate change as a result of a loss of pirates. You see, as there's fewer and fewer pirates, global temperatures have increased. Right? Well, that's a correlation, that doesn't really matter here. It's just a correlation. It's just a fluke. However, we don't always have to say that correlation never equals causation. A lot of times it does. And sometimes we know the correlation is real. In fact, with a lot of our machine learning AI, with all the information being plugged in, these things are finding patterns that we've never seen before. And we take a closer look, the correlation is the causation, or the causation is the correlation. Another example, if I go back up to like studying these birds right here, this is called a verdin, and that's its range. Their population range might be declining in certain areas due to climate change. As we see areas become hotter and drier, we see them decline in the hottest and driest places. But then as other regions northward become hotter and drier, we see them moving northward. And so what we might say is, well, that's just a correlation between climate change and their range changes. But I was part of Blair Wolf's helping him out. I'm not part of his lab, but I was going down with his lab, and they were actually conducting experiments on the thermal tolerances of birds. So they know that like if it reaches a certain thermal level too hot, all the birds die. So when we see their population decline and there's a heat wave that went above their thermal tolerance and all of a sudden they're not there, we're like, yeah, that's probably the reason. There's a high likelihood that climate change is involved with their change in range. So sometimes correlation can equal causation, especially if there's no other valid hypotheses. Good? Okay. So this is talking about climate envelope. A lot of plants and animals, or just life in general, each species has a climate envelope. Think of an envelope, right? It's this area. And that area is like where you can survive based on your tolerances. How hot, how cold, how wet, how dry. Make sense? That's where you can live. And if that climate envelope changes where you can't survive freezing temperatures, you'll die off. If it gets above 115 and you can't cool off, you die. So you have to track your climate envelope. Okay. eBird is a really fun app. If you're competitive, it brings out the worst in birders because they take themselves way too seriously. I can say that I've been birding for 30 years, so I can diss on birders a little bit, but it's a fun hobby to go out because you can get multiple species, you can get different ones each day, rare things show up. But with millions, literally millions of observations of birds, we can track with fine scale. Like this is a Sprague's pipit. It's just a little, it's not a sparrow, but it looks like a sparrow. And you can see like its summer grounds up in the north, its migration patterns, and then where it overwinters. And we can see them migrating. And then we can start asking questions based on all of these observations. So the observational data is allowing us to answer or ask a lot of questions. So observations matter. Okay, and then this is our greater roadrunner, and we can see how this is going to change over time. Then we can start asking questions of like, why are their populations changing? So this just gives you the power of observations. And the whole point here is you can also contribute with iNaturalist and eBird if you wish. There's iNaturalist, and this is a fence lizard I took a picture of, and that's where it's been seen in the U.S. So observations matter. Know the limitations and the benefits of observations. Are we good? I'm running a little behind today. So let's talk really quickly about exercise and diet on weight loss and health. And I actually have a whole podcast about this. And this goes to show the importance of experiments and how we use scientific findings to overturn our preconceptions. Okay, let's see if I can just tell the story really quick. You guys want to hear the story? Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to flip through the slides too much. You guys can read these. Let's just do this. That way you're not distracted with the slides here. How many times have you thought something and you found out you were wrong? It's hard. It's hard to admit that you're wrong. I know. Because especially when you think you know you're right. In the 1990s, I was a fitness instructor at Florida State, and I would get clients and they would come in and they would say, I want to lose weight. And like a good instructor, I'm like, well, you need to do 40 minutes of cardio 4 times a week. You should lose weight about 1 pound a month. That was our working hypothesis. We didn't make that up out of thin air. That was based on the science of the day. In the 1980s, there were experiments done that showed there's in a pound of fat around 3,500 calories. 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. We knew that if the average person walked about a mile in 20 minutes, you burned about 100 calories. So if I got you on a treadmill walking 2 miles, 40 minutes, you burn 200 calories, 8 calories, 800 calories a week, 3,200 calories a month. You should lose about a pound a month. Did any of my clients ever lose a pound a month? Hardly any. And in fact, that's the way it's been for most exercise programs. You start exercising, most people don't lose weight. Most people, you won't lose weight. Well, I was like, well, I've seen people on a treadmill. They're going like this on a flat surface, drinking a Gatorade. Gatorade's got 200 calories, right? Here I am drinking my Gatorade, eating my power bar. No, seriously, I've been in the gym and watching people go less than 3 miles an hour on a treadmill, or they're cycling like this, reading the newspaper, drinking a Gatorade, eating a power bar. Dudes, come on. I've also seen people work out and then go to Dairy Queen and get a blizzard. I'm rewarding myself for my hard work. Small blizzard's got like 300 or 400 calories, right? I call this the blizzard effect. So I thought, yeah, of course people don't lose weight. You're just eating more calories, right? If I go work out for 40 minutes, I burn 200 or 300 calories. I go eat a blizzard to reward myself. Well, there's my 300 calories I just lost. Of course you're not losing weight. So I questioned all of these things for years. I'm like, you got to control for diet. Well, guess what? Scientists are smart. Exercise physiologists are smart. Guess what they started doing? Controlling for diet. So they would have their control groups and their experimental groups. Controlled group would do no exercise. Experimental group would do exercise. They run the experiment for 6 months. The control group and the exercise group, basically the same weight before and after. No difference. Okay, got to control for diet. The controlled diet. Guess what? No difference. And I'm sitting here going, there's something wrong with that study. There's people are cheating somehow. Because I was convinced that to lose weight, you had to burn off more calories than you took in. It was as simple as that. Is it that simple? No. It turns out that our metabolism changed in response to exercise. So what happened is, if you're gonna sit as your base rate metabolism, if you're gonna burn 2,000 calories a day, you're gonna burn 2,000 calories a day, even if you start exercising a lot. And so what we learned is that when people exercised, their bodies compensated for that extra loss of calories due to exercise. So instead of spending energy on like your immune system, it would maybe dial down the immune system, or it's dialing down some other aspect of your life. I know after I go hiking, I'm not going up and running around. I'm sitting down, right? I'm sitting down and reading, watching birds come to a feeder, binging Netflix. I don't know. So one of the biggest things we've learned is that exercise doesn't necessarily lead to weight loss, because your body compensates for the extra calories you're burning. Wow. Now, you can lose weight doing exercise. There's my blizzard effect. That's why I thought that people weren't losing weight. They were just eating more. But it turns out that you can. There's me hiking in the Manzanos. I have a place right up in the Manzanos. And there's my hiking app. I do all trails. And this is, let's see, that's a 100-mile line right there. So I hiked almost 600 miles in 6 months. And I actually hiked almost 150 miles in July of 2019. And, well, I lost 15 pounds hiking almost 100 miles a month. So I'd wake up in the morning, go for a 5-mile hike, and then come into work. Most people can't do that. So you can exercise it off. It's just a lot. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I had to change my preconceptions that weight loss was a simple function of burning off more calories than you took in, because our bodies compensate. Now, really quickly, importantly, exercise does matter for your health. You might not see the scale change, but there are a lot of changes that take place in your bodies physiological changes that even if you're not losing the weight, but you're exercising, you are still better off than people not exercising. And we're starting to understand now how our bodies are compensating. And the working hypothesis is that we might be dialing down our immune system, not becoming immunosuppressed, dialing it down. And it turns out that could be very important because if our immune system is overactive, we have too much inflammation, and that can lead to other problems. Okay, so that's one of the hypotheses. So the power of experiments really got at the causation of this. We were able to hold all these variables in place, like diet and exercise, and we had to change the way we think about things, and that led to new discoveries. How is our body compensating? Where is it taking those extra calories from? How much exercise do you need each day to be healthy? What's the sweet spot? And that's what we're getting at now. So it's kind of a remarkable age, not just looking for ET, but also for exercise and diet too. Yeah, okay. I will see you guys on Tuesday. We'll start chapter 2.
I have a question about the
The reading, yeah.